Hi, this is JP Morgan. Today on Silence, I'm going to take a look at the 50mm 1.2 Canon versus the 50mm 1.8 RF lens for Canon. Now, I know there's a great disparity between these two lenses. $2,200, roughly, a little more, and $200. So what do you get here that you don't get here? What do you get here that's pretty amazing? What do you get here that's pretty amazing? Let's take a look at these two. Let's look at picture quality. Let's look at bokeh. Let's look at far focus. Let's look at infinity focus. Let's look at a close focus. Let's just see how these two lenses compare. Now, I know that you're not going to get as great a lens out of this little lens as you do this, but is it $2,000 worth it? Or maybe it's not. Let's just take a look, see exactly what we got. So this is the most important test to me, and that's the image quality test. Just how sharp is this lens and what do each of these lenses look like? I look at the 1.8 immediately as I pull these two up, and that 1.8 is a little more crunchy, it's a little more contrasty. It also has a little bit of a reddish tint to it, whereas the 1.2 is a little more yellowish. So if I punch in and just look at the, as far as sharpness goes, oh my, that RF 1.2 is pretty dang sharp. The 1.8, it's sharp. It's sharp. I mean, it's not amazing, but it's sharp. It's not terrible, but it's not the 1.2, that's for sure. So in this next image, you just see it right off. The highlights are cleaner on that 1.2. It just gives you a nice contrast. It's not as contrasty as the 1.8. The 1.8 is definitely a more contrasty lens. I feel like I see a little bit of vignetting around the edges of that 1.8, whereas I'm not seeing that on that 1.2. It's pretty clean exposure all the way across the image. I mean, that 1.8 it's sharp. It's not terrible. It really is. For a $200 lens, that's pretty amazing to me, but the 1.2 is just out of this park sharp. So here are the images I shot of the window frame. I'm in pretty tight, but I tried to frame them up about the same distance. Just want to see the difference in focus here. And again, there's so much clarity. It's just very clean and clear, the 1.2. It just is. It's a very sharp lens. It gives you the right amount of contrast. The 1.8 is trying to give you too much contrast sort of to compensate and kind of make it look a little sharper. But here's where these two lenses do take a right-hand turn, and the 1.8 has a major advantage, because if you go to a tighter shot, and the 1.8 is able to focus to about 11.8 inches, whereas the 1.2 is more like 1.1 feet, so it's going to be somewhere around 15 inches or somewhere in there. That doesn't seem like a lot, but it's pretty significant. You can see it here on how tight we can get with that 1.8 and how far back we are with the 1.2. As you move back, obviously, that's not going to be as critical, but when it comes to getting in tight on things, that 50mm 1.8 is probably one of the closest focusing 50mm that's ever been made that's not a macro lens. And so it really does give you the ability to get in really close on things. It is a fascinating thing about sharpness because sometimes a lens can be too sharp. Hasselblad used to put a filter on theirs to soften their lenses up a little bit so that they would look a little nicer with skin tone. So sometimes super sharp isn't always the goal. But in this case, obviously that 1.2 is definitely sharper than the 1.8. I love bokeh, and this little store we were at gave us a great place to be able to shoot some bokeh because the lights it had there. Several things going on here that are very interesting. Again, the lens, the 1.2 is a little bit yellowish, the 1.8 is a little bit red. You can see a difference in some ways. In this scenario, that 1.8, the red looks a little nicer on our face. These could both be corrected without any problem. But there's a really good look at the difference between 2/3 of a stop, 1.2 versus 1.8. Look at how much larger the bokeh is on the left. It blooms, it's a larger size, it's falling way more out of focus. It just gives you a much prettier kind of bokeh. Whereas the one on the right, the 1.8, is okay, but it doesn't give you that really big, beautiful bokeh like you're getting with the 1.2. So that's a matter of aperture, so that is something to consider. What's interesting though is both these lenses suffer a little bit from that kind of football out towards the edge, a little more rounded in the middle, then you get that kind of cat eye or football shape out towards the edge. They both have that problem. And in some ways, well, I don't think the 1.2 has it worse than the 1.8, but they both certainly have it. It's definitely there. That depends on whether you like that or not, or care about it or not. I think sometimes it's just a way overblown issue. I don't think it's a big deal. You know, as long as the bokeh is beautiful and has nice transition, and I think each of these do. But I do love that 2/3 of a stop you gain. So there's a difference on how round and how beautiful that bokeh is going to look. Let's take a look at one other image that's a little tighter. But what's beautiful about this, I get her eye in focus with that 1.2, but her second eye is way out of focus. On the 1.8, I get the front eye in focus, and that back eye is falling out of focus, but not as much. So the 2/3 of a stop also gives you more depth of field, something to consider as well. But when it comes to bokeh, I think that 1.2 is pretty amazing. Let's take a look at these two images when you focus on infinity. You know, I'm really getting edge-to-edge sharpness when you look at this from side to side. Very clean, very sharp. Both of these are giving us just nice and clean from side to side. So important when you're doing any kind of stars or astrophotography or anything where you want to focus out at infinity. What I did notice so immediately, and you can see it on the screen here, is that you have a tremendous vignetting going on with that 1.8, whereas you don't have that vignetting a tiny bit with the 1.2, but not near like the 1.8. The 1.2 is giving you consistent shadows and detail in the sky and in the mountain, whereas the 1.8 is giving a little bit of vignetting in the corners, and that detail falls off on the sides as far as the shadow detail starts to clog up on the sides. But there's a look at those two when it comes to focus on infinity. So let me wrap this up. This little 50mm 1.8 for $200 is a screaming deal. It gives you a close focus distance, 11.88 inches. It's lightweight, so it goes on a mirrorless camera, which makes it very simple to carry with you when you go backpacking, to carry with you in any kind of situation where you are concerned about weight. Which of these lenses would I buy? Well, it's an easy decision for me. I go for quality and sharpness overall. So I would definitely buy the 1.2 over the 1.8 for those two reasons. Sharpness and that bokeh fall off at 1.2 is really important. That's important to me. If you're going to get a fixed focal length lens, then I want it to have a very shallow depth of field. A 1.2 is a fabulous lens. I hope you learned a few things in this comparison between these two 50mm lenses. You know, price is a big factor, but quality is too. So in some ways it may come down to a very tough decision. So keep those cameras rolling and keep on clicking. Let's see what monitors I've got in my 1813 SKB case. MPF battery charger, MPF batteries, small HD 702 touch, small HD focus 7 volt 500 RX, neoprene sleeve, SDI cable, bag of antenna, 2 HDMI cables, small HD focus bolt 500 transmitter on camera monitor, D-tap to Sony NPF, neoprene cover, D-tap to AC cable, wooden camera ultra arm mini monitor mount, small HD DP4. There's the 1813 case packed up and ready to flamingo.